As the House comes to order for this important historic meeting, let us remind that each side, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, each have 11 members allowed to be present on the floor. Others may be in the gallery. This is at the guidance of the attending physician and the sergeants at arms. The gentleman on the Republican side of the aisle will please observe the social distancing and agree to what we have 11 members on each side so that we can responsibilities to this chamber, to this responsibility, and to this House of Representatives. Please exit the floor if you do not have an assigned role from your leadership. You can share with your staff if you want to have a few more, but you cannot be that close together, floor of the House, with that many people in here. And I thank the Senate and the Democrats for getting by the rules. Let's go. Let's just start. Okay.
You guys ready?
We needed you. I don't know what we're going to do.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the two houses have taken their places at the clerk's desk. Without objection, the tellers will dispense with the reading of the formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors. Mr. Blunt.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. In order to follow with the Speaker's instructions that only a limited number of people be on the floor, may I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary inquiry in the future if you're not on the floor but in the gallery?
Of Title III of the United States Code, debate is not permitted in the joint session.
The parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. I am not attempting
Gentleman's
to debate.
recognized.
I'm not attempting to debate. I'm trying to find out how a parliamentary inquiry or a parliamentary point of order would be made in following with the Speaker's request that most of us not be on the floor. How do you make one of those points of order when you don't know what's going to happen later?
Respectfully,
Yes, sir.
the gentleman's parliamentary inquiry constitutes debate, which is not permitted in the joint session under Section 18 of Title III United States Code. With that, Mr. Blunt. Microphone needs to be on.
Is this mic on?
Yeah. Is my statement out?
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you. Try again. It's not on.
Mr. President, do you think this is on?
I don't believe it's on.
It's not on.
Try it one more time.
Is it working? Okay.
He should, you could ask for one.
Are you ready?
Let's get order, gentlemen.
Want me to read it whether they can hear it or not?
They think it's working, so we'll try again. Get order.
Mr. President,
Order in the chamber.
Mr. President,
Gentlemen will continue.
the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 9 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alabama that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none. This certificate from Alaska, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote from that state that purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of the state purporting to appoint and ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 3 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alaska that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
If not, there are none. This certificate.
Hearing none. This certificate from Arizona, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote that the state purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arizona seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware received 11 votes for president, and Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 11 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is. An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law, Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given.
Are there further objections to the certificates from the state of Arizona? The chair hears none. The two houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session. The Senate will now retire to its chamber.
The chair will remind members of the need to adhere to the decorum requirements of the chamber as laid out in the Speaker's announced policies of January 4th, 2021, in accordance with the guidance and advice of the attending physician. Members are advised to remain in the chamber only if they are participating in debate and must wear a mask at all times, even when under recognition for debate. Members must also practice proper social distancing when present in the chamber. Let the record show that there is a gross violation of this guidance from the attendants on the Republican side of the aisle. Please, in the interest of your own health and as an example to the American people, abide by the numbers, now up to 25 on each side of the aisle, to participate in this stage of the development. Okay? Pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution 1, and Section 17 of Title III of the United States Code, when the two houses withdraw from the joint session to count the electoral vote for separate consideration of an objection, a representative may speak to the objection for 5 minutes and not more than once. Debate shall not exceed 2 hours, after which the chair will put in the question, shall the objection be agreed to? The clerk will report the objection made in the joint session.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given. Signed, Paul Gosar, Representative, State of Arizona. Ted Cruz, Senator, State of Texas.
Thank you. The chair will endeavor to alternate recognition between members seeking support of the objection and members seeking opposition to the objection. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to object to a number of states that did not follow the constitutional requirement for selecting electors. Madam Speaker, this is something that is clear that our founding fathers debated about as a fundamental decision of how we choose our president. There was a lot of back and forth, if anyone reads the founding documents of our country, about the different versions they went through to ultimately come up with a process where each state has elections, each state has a process for selecting their electors and sending them to Washington. And Madam Speaker, in a number of those states, that constitutional process was not followed. And that's why we're here to object. If you look at what the requirement says, nowhere in Article 2, Section 1 does it give the Secretary of State of a state that ability. Nowhere does it give the governor that ability. Nowhere does it give a court that ability. It exclusively gives that ability to the legislatures. And in fact, in most states, that's the process that was followed. But for those states that this wasn't followed, unfortunately, this is not new. We've seen over and over again more states where the Democrat Party has gone in and selectively gone around this process. That has to end, Madam Speaker. We have to follow the constitutional process. Now, there might be reasons why some people don't like the process laid out by a legislative body. Madam Speaker, I served on one of those legislative bodies when I was in the state legislature for 12 years. I served on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee where we wrote the laws for our state's elections. And I can tell you, when we had to make changes, those were extensively negotiated. We would have people on both sides come, Republicans and Democrats, Madam Speaker, would get together to work through those changes, any minute change, to how a precinct would function, to how a change would be made in the time of an election, signature requirements, all the many things that involve a clerk carrying out the duties in each parish, in our case. You would see people come and give testimony. Madam Speaker, both sides could come. Clerks of court were there in the hearing rooms. It was an open process, by the way, not behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room where somebody might want to bully a Secretary of State to get a different version that might benefit them or their party or their candidate. That's not what our founding fathers said is the process. Maybe it's how some people wanted to carry it out, but they laid out that process. And so when we would have to make those changes, they were in public view. They were heavily debated. And then ultimately, those laws were changed in advance of the election so everybody knew what the rules were. People on both sides knew how to play the rules before the game started, not getting somewhere in the process and saying, well, you don't think it's going to benefit you, so you try to go around the Constitution. That's not how our system works. It's gotten out of hand. And so President Trump has called this out. And President Trump has stood up to it. So many of us have stood up to it. And in fact, over 100 of my colleagues, Madam Speaker, asked the Supreme Court to address this problem just a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, the court chose to punt. They didn't answer it one way or the other. They didn't want to get in the middle of this discussion. We don't have that luxury today. We have to discuss this. We have to fix this. In fact, on our first full day of this Congress, many of us brought legislation onto the House floor to start fixing the problems with our elections, to restore integrity to the election process, which has been lost by so many millions of Americans. And we had a vote. Every single Republican voted to reform the process. Every single Democrat voted against it. They don't want to fix this problem. But the Constitution is our guide. And it's time we start following the Constitution. It's time we get back to what our founding fathers said is the process for selecting electors. That's the legislatures. In public view, not behind closed doors, not smoke-filled rooms, not bullying somebody that might give you a better ruling. Let's get back to rule of law and follow the Constitution, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman It's over now. I thought it was Jamie. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for
Madam
5
Speaker,
minutes.
Madam Speaker, this day marks a crossroads for American democracy. Those who object to the counting of the Electoral College votes, which reflect the votes of the American people, want to substitute their preferences for the voters' choice. That's not what our Constitution requires, and it's at odds with the American Democratic Republic. If Congress selects the next president instead of American voters, we'll have no need for an electoral college. In fact, we'd have no need for presidential elections at all. We'd be moving from a government elected by the people to a government selected by those already governing. That's not America. In the United States, we abide by the choices of the people, not an elite few. The framers of our Constitution considered whether to have Congress select the president and specifically rejected it. Instead, they wrote Article 2 and the 12th Amendment. Article 2 creates the Electoral College, where each state appoints electors. Laws of all 50 states and D.C. require electors to vote for the winner of the state's popular election. Each state provides for the orderly conduct of elections, including lawful challenges, recounts, and the like. The 12th Amendment is what brings us to today. It says the electors meet in their states. That happened December 14th. The amendment says the electors shall cast their votes, sign and certify them, transmit them to a seal. That's been done. The sealed envelopes containing the signed, certified ballots from each state's electors, reflecting the votes of the people, were in those mahogany boxes. The 12th Amendment directs the President, as the Vice President, as the President of the Senate, to do only this: open the sealed envelopes, and then the vote shall be counted. Simple. It doesn't say counted in a manner that some members of Congress or the Vice President might prefer. No. The votes are simply to be counted as certified and transmitted by the states. During Reconstruction after the Civil War, more than one slate of electors were appointed by states. Dueling lists were sent and protracted processes were undertaken in presidential elections. And as a result, to make an orderly process, Congress enacted the Electoral Count Act of 1887. This law governs our proceedings today. The act provides dispute resolution mechanisms. Under the ECA, if a governor certifies a slate of electors and there are no competing slates from that state, the governor's certified slate must be counted. Today, every single slate of electors, won by Joe Biden or won by Donald Trump, got their governor's certification. Not a single state submitted a competing slate. There's no dispute to resolve. The 2020 election was the most secure election conducted in modern history. Challenges were resolved by lawful recounts and audits. The result, Vice President Biden won the 2020 election. More than 60 lawsuits were filed contesting elements of the election process. None of these lawsuits prevailed. Why? As even President Trump's own judicial appointees ruled, there was no evidence of any wrongdoing that would change the outcome. The people spoke. It was not a close election. The margin of victory for Biden in 2020 was larger than Trump's margin in 2016. In fact, the Biden victory is one of the most decisive in modern times, exceeding the margin enjoyed by Reagan when he defeated Carter in 1980. Congress has gathered in joint session to count electoral votes every 4 years since 1789. I understand the disappointment people feel when their candidate for president loses. I've felt the same several times in my voting life. When that happens, it's not an invitation to upend the Constitution and the laws of the United States. It's an invitation to work with the new president for the good of the country and to wait for the next election in 4 years if you're dissatisfied. In that spirit, I urge my colleagues to uphold the American democracy and reject the objection, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Who's that? For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Americans instinctively know there was something wrong with this election. During the campaign, Vice President Biden would do an event and he'd get 50 people at the event. President Trump, at just one rally, gets 50,000 people. President Trump increases vote with African Americans, increases vote with Hispanic Americans, won 19 of 20 bellwether counties, won Ohio by 8, Iowa by 8, and Florida by 3. Got 11 million more votes than he did in 2016, and House Republicans won 27 of 27 toss-up races. But somehow, the guy who never left his house wins the election? 80 million Americans, 80 million of our fellow citizens, Republicans and Democrats, have doubts about this election. And 60 million people, 60 million Americans think it was stolen. But Democrats say, no problem, no worries, everything's fine. We asked for an investigation. We asked Chairman Nadler, Chairwoman Maloney for an investigation. They said no. Wouldn't want to investigate something that half the electorate has doubts about. It's just the presidency of the United States. Why? Why not one single investigation? Why not even one single hearing over the last 9 weeks in the United States House of Representatives? Why? Because all the Democrats care about is making sure President Trump isn't president. For 4.5 years, that's all they've cared about. July 31st, 2016, before he was elected the first time, Jim Comey's FBI takes out the insurance policy, opens an investigation on the president based on nothing. May 17th, 2017, Bob Mueller named special counsel. 2 years, they investigate the Russia hoax, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, and $40 million of taxpayer money for nothing. December 18th, 2019, Democrat House members vote to impeach President Trump based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge who was biased against the president and who worked for Joe Biden. But none of that worked. As hard as they tried, none of that worked. They threw everything they had at him. So what did they do next? They changed the rules. They changed the election law. and they did it in an unconstitutional fashion. And that's what we're going to show over the next several hours of debate. The Constitution is clear, as Whip Scalise just said. State legislatures, and only state legislatures, set election law. In Arizona, the law says voter registration ends on October 5th. Democrats said, we don't care what the law says. They went to a court, got an Obama-appointed judge to extend it 18 days. No debate, as Steve talked about. No debate, no discussion, he just did it. Pennsylvania, same thing. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots have to be in by 8 p.m. Election Day. Democrat Supreme Court said, nope, we're going to extend it. Election Day doesn't end on Tuesday now. They took it to Friday. Extended the election 3 days. Not the legislature, partisan Supreme Court. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots require signature verification. Democrat Secretary of State said, nope, I'm going to decide by myself that it doesn't. For 2.6 million ballots. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots can't be processed until Election Day. Some counties said no. And you can imagine which counties they were. Democrat-run counties said no and allowed ballots to be cured and fixed before Election Day. They did an in-run around the Constitution in every state that Republicans will object to today. Every single one. It was a pattern. It was their template. They did it in Arizona. They did it in Georgia. They did it in Michigan. They did it in Pennsylvania. They did it in Nevada. They did it in Wisconsin. And yet some members say, don't worry about it. We shouldn't do anything. Just let it go. It was just 6 states who violated the Constitution. What if it's 10 states the next time? What if it's 15? What if in 2024, 2028, it's 26 states? What if it's half the states do an end run around the Constitution clearly spells out? We are the final check and balance. The authority rests with us, the United States Congress, the body closest to the American people, right where the founders wanted it. We should do our duty. We should object to and vote for this objection to the Arizona electors. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized without objection for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, a little more than 2 months ago, America performed an extraordinary feat. Under some of the most trying circumstances in our history, our fellow citizens conducted a free and fair election, vindicating our founders' belief once again that we were capable of self-government and a peaceful transition of power. On November 3rd, the American people chose Joe Biden to be their next president by an enormous margin. The successful conduct of that election, among the most secure in American history, was not an accident. It was the result of the dedicated work of thousands of volunteers, canvassers, poll workers, electors, and state and local election officials. When the conduct of any state election was challenged, the courts, through judges appointed by Democrats and those appointed by Republicans, heard unsubstantiated claims of fraud, found they had no merit, and said so. But most important, the American people persevered. In the midst of the worst pandemic in a century, America had one of the most impressive elections in a century with historic voter turnout. Our fellow citizens did their civic duty. The question we face today is, will we do ours? That we are here with a substantial number of our members seeking to overturn an election is remarkable, tragic, and all too predictable. For it is the natural result of a locomotive set in motion months ago with a myth. For weeks and weeks before, during, and after our election, a dangerous falsehood was propagated that our election would be marred by massive fraud. Never mind, it was the same election which brought the very men and women to this chamber who would challenge its results. What value has consistency when measured against ambition? A former senator from Georgia, remarking on a contested election over a century ago, said that able men, learned men, distinguished men, great men in the eyes of the nation seemed intent only on accomplishing a party triumph without regard to the consequences to the country. That is human nature. That is, he said, unfortunately, party nature. Was he right? We stand in a house which was once the place of giants. Have we become so small? Does our oath to uphold the Constitution, taken just days ago, mean so very little? I think not. I believe, to quote our dear departed friend Elijah Cummings, that we are better than that. I think Elijah would be proud that the debate here today is not between Democrats and Republicans, and that some Republicans, including the Republican leader of the Senate, remain devoted to the principle that we are a nation of laws, not individuals, let alone a single individual. It may seem unfair to the new members who have only just taken the oath for the first time that they should be so soon tested with one of the most consequential votes they may cast, no matter how long they serve. But it is so, and none of us can shrink from that responsibility. Nor can we console ourselves with the intoxicating fiction that we can break that oath without consequence, because doing so will not succeed in overturning the election. An oath is no less broken when the breaking fails to achieve its end. We must be mindful that any who seek to overturn an election will do injury to our Constitution, whatever the result. For just as the propagation of that dangerous myth about this election made this moment inevitable, our actions today will put another train in motion. This election will not be overturned, but what about the next, or the one after that? What shall we say when our democratic legacy is no more substantial than the air, except that we brought trouble to our own house and inherited the wind? This isn't the first time we've had a contentious election, and it won't be the last. In 1800, John Adams lost a closely contested election to Thomas Jefferson in the first peaceful transition of power from one party to another in our history. Adams was hardly pleased with the result, choosing to skip the inaugural activities. But he did what leaders are required to do in a democratic government when they lose. He went home. He went home. Jefferson, has my time expired, Madam Speaker?
10 seconds.
Would later refer to his victory as the Revolution of 1800, but marveled that the revolution had occurred by the rational and peaceful instruments of reform, the suffrage of the people. It has never been our place to overturn an election. And if we hope to remain a democracy, it never will be.
Arizona? For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I rise to support the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I join the objection to counting votes of electors from my home state of Arizona, as well as Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada, because election integrity is the heart of our American constitutional republic. In a representative form of government, we must be able to trust that our elections accurately represent the will of the American voter. This is the appropriate forum anticipated and provided for by our founders to debate whether this election complied with the Constitution that we've all sworn to protect. Every particular of the Constitution is to be protected, including Article 2, Section 1. The debate as to the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election has been suppressed by the left and its propagandists in the media until today. State legislatures are required to determine the manner in which electors are chosen. Arizona names its electors on the general election ballot and identifies what candidate those electors are required to vote for should that candidate obtain the majority of votes in the general election. As part of the manner for determining electors, Arizona also establishes deadlines for voter registration. The deadline has been in place for 30 years. This year, that voter registration deadline was October 5th. Early voting commenced 2 days later. 5 days before the deadline, a group filed a lawsuit demanding that Arizona election officials not enforce the deadline. the federal district court decided that since other states have a deadline later than Arizona's, and some even allow for registration when voting, that Arizona's new deadline would be a time he chose, not the legislator's timeline. The appellate court effectively overturned the lower court ruling and noted that the Arizona deadline established by the state legislature was sound and appropriate and complied with the Constitution. But the appellate court merely shortened the extension, the bypassing of the deadline, to 10 days. The appellate court, without legal justification, also decided that everyone who registered after the legal deadline, but before the deadline created by judicial fiat, could still vote. Note that the Arizona legislature was no longer in control of determining the manner of appointing presidential electors because the court had set a new deadline, even though the appellate court found the legislature's deadline was constitutionally sound. During that window, more than 32,000 voters registered in Maricopa County alone. Here are copies of those voter registration records. In going around the deadline set by the legislature, the court ignored the Arizona legislature's obligation and right to direct the manner for choosing presidential electors as set forth in Article 2, Section 1. As a consequence of that judicial usurpation, more than 32,000 people were allowed to unlawfully cast ballots in Arizona's presidential election in 2020. The Arizona legislature seeks an independent audit of the election. The governor refuses now to call them into a special session. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors has refused to comply with legislative subpoenas. In Arizona, the people who control the evidence related to the election have done everything possible to prevent an independent audit directed by the legislature. Arizonans have used the limited amount of records available to investigate the 2020 presidential election. Of a limited sample of 1,000 addresses of voters, they found 539 voters did not live at the addresses on the voter rolls. Here is a stack of 1,000 declaration of affidavits supporting that. I object to the continuing counting the votes of Arizona electors because the federal courts went around the legislatively constructed mechanism for choosing Arizona's presidential electors, allowing tens of thousands of voters to unlawfully cast votes. The court usurped a key component of the Arizona legislature's manner of selecting presidential electors, thus violating Article 2, Section 1. The legislature is being obstructed in its efforts. And what little evidence we have, or little information we have, has produced this kind of evidence which indicates a significant problem with the integrity of the presidential election. Madam Speaker, I ask that my written comments, together with the voter registration records that reflect the 32,000 registrations permitted in contravention of state law, letters and resolutions from Arizona legislators pertaining to the count of votes from electors, along with approximately 1,000 affidavits and declarations pertaining to potential voter fraud in Arizona in the 2020 presidential election, and the statement of Congressman Randy Weber of Texas be made a part of the record. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized without objection for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank you first and all my dear beloved colleagues for your love and tenderness, which my family and I will never forget. Thank you again. Abraham Lincoln, whose name is a comfort to us all, said, "We've got the best government the world ever knew." It's best because the first 3 words of the Constitution tell us who governs here: we the people. Watch this proceeding today and tell the world with pride, as Lincoln did, about the brilliant meaning and promise of our country. Our government belongs to the people. As President Ford said, "Here the people rule." Today, we are in the people's house to complete the people's process for choosing the people's president. We assemble in joint session for a solemn purpose that we've all sworn a sacred oath to faithfully discharge. The 12th Amendment obligates each and every one of us to count the electoral votes to recognize the will of the people in the 2020 presidential election. We are not here, Madam Speaker, to vote for the candidate we want. We are here to recognize the candidate the people actually voted for in the states. Madam Speaker, the 2020 election is over, and the people have spoken. Joe Biden received more than 80 million votes, 7 million more than President Trump, a number larger than any other president has received in U.S. history. This sweeping popular victory translated into an Electoral College victory of 306 to 232, a margin which President Trump pronounced a landslide when he won by those exact same numbers in 2016. So now we count the electoral votes that were just delivered to us in the beautiful mahogany cases brought by those hardworking Senate pages. These mahogany cases contain only the 538 electoral votes that were sent in by the states, not the 159 million ballots that were cast by our constituents. Those were counted 2 months ago by hundreds of thousands of election officials and poll workers across America who risked their health and even their lives in the time of COVID to deliver what our Department of Homeland Security called the most secure election in American history. Many of these officials have endured threats of retribution, violence, and even death just for doing their jobs. Just as the popular vote was for Biden, so was the electoral vote. On December 15th, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recognized it. The Electoral College has spoken, Senator McConnell said from the Senate floor. Today, I want to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden. Yet we have seen escalating attacks on our election with unfounded claims of fraud and corruption. More than 60 lawsuits have been brought to date seeking to overturn the results. They have failed repeatedly, and they have failed spectacularly. Every objection we hear today maligning our states and their officials, both Republican and Democrat, has been litigated, adjudicated, and obliterated in both federal and state court. The president has not just had his day in court, my friends. He has had more than 2 months in court looking for a judge to embrace these arguments. In more than 50 cases, Madam Speaker, at least 88 different judges, including many appointed by the president himself, have meticulously rejected the president's claims of fraud and corruption. Take Georgia U.S. District Judge Stephen Grimberg, named to the bench by President Trump this year. Last year, he rejected Trump's prayer to block certification of Biden's victory in Georgia, saying it has no basis in fact or law. Take U.S. District Judge Brett Ludwig, another Trump nominee who took the bench in September. He dismissed a lawsuit seeking to overturn the results in Wisconsin, calling it extraordinary. A sitting president who did not prevail in his bid for re-election has asked for federal court help in setting aside the popular vote based on issues he plainly could have raised before the vote occurred. He wrote, "This court has allowed plaintiff the chance to make his case, and he has lost on the merits." Trump has asked for the rule of law to be followed, Judge Ludwig observed, and he said definitively, it has been. I've been a constitutional law professor for 30 years, and if I were to test my students on these decisions, it would be the easiest test in the world, because the plaintiffs have lost nearly every case and every issue in the most sweeping terms. That's all they would have to remember. There is no basis in fact or law to justify the unprecedented relief that is being requested of nullifying these elections. We are here to count the votes. Let us do our job.
Gentleman's time, Lieutenant. Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
I rise to support the objection.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to ease everyone's nerve, I want you to all know that I am not here to challenge anyone to a duel like Alexander Hamilton or Aaron Burr. Madam Speaker, my primary objection to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona is based on the Constitution and the direction of state legislatures through state law as spelled out in the following two clauses. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 states in part, and I quote, "Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors." And the election clause of the Constitution provides state legislatures with explicit authority to prescribe, and I quote, "the times, places, and manners of holding elections," end quote. For more than 3 decades, Arizona law set by the state legislature has required that voter registration end no later than 29 days before an election. This is clear. It is law, unless amended by the state legislature. This is the way it needs to be carried out. In Arizona, the deadline for voter registration for the 2020 presidential election was October 5, 2020. Using COVID as a reasoning, Democrats filed a lawsuit to extend this deadline by 18 days. And an injunction was made by an Obama-appointed judge preventing the Arizona Secretary of State from enforcing the constitutional deadline set by the state legislature. As a result of this frivolous partisan lawsuit, 10 extra days were added via judicial fiat to allow voter registration. These 10 days were added after voting had already begun. This is completely indefensible. You cannot change the rules of an election while it is underway and expect the American people to trust it. Now, in this 10-day period, at least 30,000 new voters registered to vote in Arizona. All of these votes are unconstitutional. It does not matter if they voted for President Trump or if they voted for Vice President Biden. They did not register in time for the election. The law states October 5th. Either we have laws or we do not. If we allow state election laws as set forth by the state legislature to be ignored and manipulated on the whims, partisan lawsuit, unelected bureaucrats,
Order. The House will be in order.
If we allow state election laws as set forth by state legislatures to be ignored and manipulated on the whims of partisan lawsuits, unelected bureaucrats, unlawful procedures, and arbitrary rules, then our constitutional republic will cease to exist. The oath that I took this past Sunday to defend and support the Constitution makes it necessary for me to object to this travesty. Otherwise, the laws passed by the legislative branch merely become suggestions to be accepted, rejected, or manipulated by those who did not pass them. Madam Speaker, I have constituents outside this building right now. I promised my voters to be their voice. In this branch of government, which I now serve, it is my separate but equal obligation to weigh in on this election and object. Are we not a government of, by, and for the people? They know that this election is not right, and as their representative, I am sent here to represent them. I will not allow the people to be ignored. Madam Speaker, it is my duty under the U.S. Constitution to object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. The members who stand here today and accept the results of this concentrated, coordinated, partisan effort by Democrats, where every fraudulent vote cancels out the vote of an honest America, has sided with the extremist left. The United States Congress needs to make an informed decision, and that starts with this objection. I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Brian Mast.
Madam Speaker, I rise as well to support the objection, and I rise with a simple question. Can the chair honestly tell Americans that with pending Supreme Court legislation or pending Supreme Court case over legal observers not being allowed to observe and inspect signatures, that the laws and Constitution of that state were not violated to change voting outcomes? Madam Speaker, I will wait for a response.
I'm sorry? Gentleman has 25 seconds remaining.
I will repeat my question. Can you honestly tell Americans that with pending Supreme Court case over legal observers not being able to observe and inspect signatures, that the laws and Constitution of Arizona did not be violated to change voting outcomes, and I will wait for a response.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, today is an important day. In 1862, during the depths of the Civil War, President Lincoln submitted his annual message to Congress, to this body. And in it, he wrote the following: "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." We gather today, Madam Speaker, to ensure the survival of our grand American experiment, the greatest democracy this world has ever known. And there are millions of people watching today's proceedings. The eyes of the world are on us now, my colleagues, wondering if we will keep the faith, wondering if our constitutional republic will hold. Will we adhere to our Constitution, that solemn, visionary document that has guided us so well for so long and enabled the peaceful transfer of power for the last 230 years? Will we continue to be a country premised on the consent of the governed, a Congress that respects the will of the people, and a republic that will endure? Those are the questions before us today, Madam Speaker. With respect to my new colleague from Colorado, the question is not whether Joe Biden was elected the 46th President of the United States. He clearly was. The people of Arizona, like so much of the country, spoke clearly and resoundingly. They voted in record numbers. And over 81 million Americans selected Joe Biden as the next president. Now, today we hear from some in this chamber, not all, but some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, vague claims of fraud. No substance, no evidence, no facts, no explanation for why over 88 judges across this land have rejected the very same claims. Madam Speaker, the bottom line is this. As my colleague Representative Raskin so eloquently put it, the people have spoken. And that is why on December 14th, the Electoral College met to certify the election of a duly elected president, just as they've done for centuries. During terrible world wars, recessions, depressions, plagues, and pandemics, they met their duty, and they once again rose to the occasion and certified the election. And the question now is, will we do ours? Now, I know there are many textualists among us, many of my colleagues, who would understand that the Constitution must guide our work today. And the Constitution is crystal clear. Our duty today is a narrow one. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3 reads, "The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the President." That's it. Period. Our job is not to replace the judgment made by the American people with our own. And yet that is precisely what so many of my House and Senate Republican colleagues ask this body to do, to substitute their judgment for the expressed will of the American people. In America, we don't do that. In the United States, we accept the results of free and fair elections. We don't ignore the will of the voters, Madam Speaker, and attempt to install a preferred candidate into power. That doesn't happen here. I will close with this. Our duty, our task, is a very simple one: to honor the voice of the people, to honor our Constitution, to count the votes, certify this election, and begin to heal this great country of ours. I pray each of us may find the courage to do so. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we have a solemn responsibility today. We must vote to sustain objections to states of electors submitted by states that we genuinely believe clearly violated the Constitution and the presidential election of 2020. This is the threshold legal question before us, and it's an issue before us for the state of Arizona. We got to repeat this for emphasis because a lot of people seem to be confused. Because judges and not the state legislature changed the rules of the election, Arizona clearly violated the plain language of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution in its selection of presidential electors. The framers of our Constitution recognized that elections were susceptible to corruption. We all know that. So how did they fix it? How did they provide for that? They created the Electoral College as a safeguard, and they expressly empowered state legislatures to ensure the integrity of our unique election system. Only the state legislatures, because they're a full body of representatives and not rogue officials, were given the authority to direct the manner of appointing presidential electors because it was so important. The Supreme Court has acknowledged this over and over. They previously affirmed in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, quote, "The appointment of these electors is thus placed absolutely and wholly with the legislatures of the several states. That authority can never be taken away or abdicated." The Arizona legislature did enact detailed rules and procedures that state was determined and was supposed to follow to choose its electors. But in the months preceding the 2020 election, as we've heard, and by the way, 1,000 pages of evidence have just been submitted on the facts on this, those well-established rules and procedures were deliberately changed. They weren't changed by the legislature, friends. They were changed by judges. And those actions taken by the judiciary were not limited to mere interpretations of existing law. No, they were substantive, wholesale changes to those statutes. That's a usurpation of the authority that the legislature had. That usurpation was repeated across the country this year. It's the primary reason. It's one of the reasons why the election of 2020 became riddled with an unprecedented number of serious allegations of fraud and irregularities all over the country. National polls, as has been said, indicate that a huge percentage of Americans now have serious doubts about not just the outcome of this presidential contest, but also the future reliability of our election system itself. Since we are convinced that the election laws in Arizona and some other key states were changed in this unconstitutional manner, we have a responsibility today. The slates of electors produced under those modified laws are thus unconstitutional. They are, quote, not regularly given or lawfully certified as required by the Electoral Count Act, and they're invalid on their face. That's just the conclusion that you have to reach. Given these inescapable facts, we believe we have no choice today but to vote to sustain objections to those slates of electors. Mr. Raskin and others today have cited the 12th Amendment, and they cite Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3. Remember that, Clause 3, and they've asserted that Congress has only one narrow role today. We're just supposed to count the electoral votes that have been submitted. But those advocates have overlooked a critical first principle. Their assertion is only true so long as Congress first is convinced that the electoral votes that are produced by a process that violated the Constitution is there. We got to get through Clause 2 of Article 2, Section 1 before we get to Clause 3 is the point. Look, in our unique system, Congress is positioned as the last bulwark in a presidential election to ensure the Constitution has been followed. Indeed, in just two decades ago, the Supreme Court spoke to this. They plainly acknowledged this important deliberative role of Congress. It was the famous Bush v. Gore litigation that everybody remembers from 2000. In a per curiam opinion, meaning all 9 justices, it was unanimous. They noted strict adherence to the provisions of the Electoral Count Act may, quote, create a safe harbor for a state insofar as congressional consideration of its electoral votes is concerned. However, they said, unanimously, the court said, since Title III, Section 5 contains a principle of federal law that would assure finality of the state's determination if they followed all the prescriptions there, if a legislature, the will of the legislature is attempted to be changed by a state court, that is a problem. That, they said, Congress might deem to be a change in the law. That's precisely why we're here right now. Go read Bush v. Gore and you'll see this. Chief Justice William Rehnquist in Scalia and Thomas joined in a concurring opinion 8 days later, and they reiterated this point. A significant departure from the legislature's scheme for appointing presidential electors presents a federal question. It's a big problem for us, and it's one we cannot get around. That's why we're here. I urge my colleagues today to look at the facts, to follow the law, and follow our congressional oath. We're supposed to support and defend the Constitution. That's what we do here today. I urge everyone to do the right thing, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona, the Dean of the Arizona delegation, seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This exercise in futility that Congress is undertaking is at the behest of Republican members of Congress. The effort to overturn the presidential election and grant Donald Trump 4 more years is the motivation behind it. And to continue a baseless, conspiracy-fueled threat to our democracy makes no sense, because there is no viable constitutional or legal path to overturn the election that will make Vice President Biden and Senator Harris President and Vice President of the United States after January 20th. One certain outcome of this whole process is the weakening of our democracy and the threatening of our democracy. Beginning with Arizona, Congress is being asked to chase down a rabbit hole, baseless, discredited, and judicially discarded fringe conspiracy theories. But for the record, let's talk a little bit about Arizona. Arizona and state and local officials did an unbelievable job to ensure that the 2020 elections ran smoothly. Mr. Hickman, the Republican chairman of the Maricopa County Party, the largest county in the state of Arizona, said, no matter how you voted, this election was administered with integrity, transparency, and in accordance with state laws. Arizona showed up to the polls in record numbers. More than 3.4 million people voted, increases in every county, and 65% of all eligible voters in Arizona voted in the 2020 election. Arizona's cast their ballots up and down for Republicans and Democrats, and 11 electoral votes were granted to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris based on their victory in Arizona. That's the story. Arizona voted in hundreds of races this year. And in addition to the presidency, these races include 9 members of the state's congressional delegation that are with you. 4 of them, my Republican colleagues. These members have already been seated in the 117th Congress. They do not question the accuracy of Arizona's 2020 elections to select a congressional delegation, yet my 4 Republican colleagues question the presidential election. Our colleagues may say they are only asking questions and seeking to reassure voters. But let us be clear, these questions have been answered by the voters and by the courts. Rather than accepting the answers and the results of the election, they are fanning the flames of unfounded suspicion and once again creating a threat, a very real and dangerous threat to our democracy. Again, our friends do not question the outcomes of their own elections. That is, because they have no reason to, just as they have no legitimate reason to question the results of the presidential election in Arizona. I ask my colleagues to reject this objection, to respect the will of the voters in the state of Arizona and throughout this country, and to fundamentally add some preservation to our democracy from any future damage that this effort that we are undertaking in this House today and in the Senate today does not further damage our democracy. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of my objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I filed my petition, a challenge on the slate of electors from the state of Arizona that was actually put forward by Governor Ducey of Arizona. My ask to you, the Speaker, to the Vice President, is simple. Do not count these electors until and unless the Secretary of State allows a forensic audit of the election, a request she has denied repeatedly. We have been told over and over that even though this was a public election, using public money on public machines, utilizing public employees, the public today has no ability to simply double-check the veracity of these results. If the presidential election was a football game, we would get a slow-motion review from multiple angles and a correction of a controversial decision. But not so, we are told by our Secretary of State for the presidential election. No review for you. No access to the Dominion voting machines with a documented history of enabling fraud through its now discredited adjudication system, a system that literally allows one person to change tens of thousands of votes in a mere minutes. In the only audit done in Arizona, a court found 3% error rate against President Trump. Vice President Biden's margin of error was 1/10 of that, at 0.03%. By the way, a 3% error rate at minimum is 90,000 ballots. After finding the 3% error rate, the court stopped the audit and refused to go further. In Arizona, as my attachments make it clear, mail-in ballots were altered on the first day of counting, as shown in data graphs we provide, and is concluded by data analysts. Over 400,000 mail-in ballots were altered, switched from President Trump to Vice President Biden, or completely erased from President Trump's totals. The proof is in the counting curves, the curves that cannot occur except with odds so rare and unlikely that winning the Mega Millions lottery is more probable. Mr. Speaker, can I have order in the chamber?
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Okay. The House will be in order. House will be in order. Members will take their seats. The House will be in order. Okay. Okay. We can get order. We can resume. Without objection, the Chair declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
House will be in order. We need order in the House so we can proceed. The gentleman from Arizona has 2 3/4 minutes.
56 failed that test. They were vacant lots. Even the recorder's office used as addresses. What are they hiding? If the process was fair, these would be improbable. These would be once-in-a-lifetime type applications. So let's look at the ballots, the signatures, and the adjudicated records. Until this is done, Mr. Speaker, we should not count this slate. You have a letter from the Arizona legislature stating its intent to review the issue on January 11th. Our governor has refused to allow the state to properly convene to do its proper oversight. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I ask you one question today. Are you a ceremonial figurehead in your current role, or did the drafters of the 12th Amendment and Congress in the Electoral Count Act of 1887 envision a role where you made discretionary decisions about ballot fraud and fair elections? If you were merely ceremonial, then let's be done with this. Let's eat our tea and crumpets and witness our national decline. But if you're not merely a ceremonial but vested with discernment, rationality, and legal authority to not just count from 1 to 270, then do not accept Arizona's electors as certified. Remand the slate back to the Secretary of State, back to the governor with the following instructions. Until a full, complete electoral forensic audit is allowed by the Secretary of State, the electors currently certified will not be counted. It will then fall on the state of Arizona to decide, does its electors, are they in the game or not? Anything less is an abdication of our Constitution, our republic, and our ethos. One man, one vote. We ask why? What is there to hide? Shouldn't the lawful victor of an election be proud, open, transparent about an election audit? I would. Instead, we were met with denials, cover-ups, and contempt of subpoenas. There's too much evidence of fraud demonstrated by statistical anomalies that experts have determined cannot happen in the absence of fraud to accept such a slate. I'm not asking these electors never be counted. It's just that they need to be certified the proper way. Our beloved Constitution is but a mere piece of paper if we do not follow the law, upholding the law. But now, alas, we find ourselves lawless, destroying the very thread that binds us together. But we need to get back to the rule of law. That is what has been violated, truly, by the actions in these states.
The gentleman's time has expired. Without objection, the House is going to go back into recess. so we get an update. So I need everybody's attention.
Get down under your chairs if necessary, so we have folks entering the rotunda and coming down this way. So we'll update you as soon as we can, but just be prepared. Stay calm.
I need everybody's attention, please. We have another announcement, another update.
Hey, you hear us now? You going to ignore us now? You're going to start treating us with respect. We were the wrong crowd to fuck with.
Probably shouldn't have worn all black.
Revolution has begun. You witnessed it. Boy, did you see that Antifa who started it?
Good angle.
Okay.
I'll call the people in the hall.
Not online. What would it be? It will be NBCNewsNow.com. And is it a local PC? Network.
Just,
What's in the backpack? I'm like, oh my god, we're going through this fucking shit right now. Who are you with? Okay. there was like a tidal wave ready to